So the first session is going to be presented by Paul Jones and Paul Leverens. I will read their openings. So Paul Jones is manager of the National AgrAbility Project, which is administered to the Purdue University's Breaking New Ground Resource Center in Purdue's Department of Agriculture and Biological Engineering. He has been a staff member in Purdue's Agricultural Safety and Health Program since 1998. Paul began managing Indiana AgrAbility Project in 2000 and began managing the National AgrAbility Project in 2008. He specializes in educational resources, including publications, videos, and distance learning activities. And the Paul Squared presentation today, the other one is Paul Leverens. He was born and raised on a Wisconsin dairy farm that has been in his family for 5 generations. He incurred a disability working nights in a factory trying to help the farm financially. This led to medical advice that Paul not continue farming. He then pursued an undergraduate degree from University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh in human services with a minor in substance abuse. He continued his education at Mankato State University in Mankato, Minnesota, receiving his master's of science in vocational rehabilitational counseling with minors in both assistive technology and substance abuse. Paul began his professional career with Easter Seals, Wisconsin in 1992, working with Easter Seals Farm Program and its partnership with the AgrAbility of Wisconsin program. So welcome, Paul and Paul. I will let you two take it.
Thank you, Lonnie. Is my screen displaying correctly?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, as indicated, this is going to be a multi-panelist session. Paul Leverens and I are going to be talking first, and then Carrie Wilson, and then we've got 2 more after us. So, advance that. Paul Leverens is actually going to be sharing first, so I'll turn things over to Paul, and then I'll come back when he's finished.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everybody. It's good to see some familiar names, if not faces, on the screen. I wish you all could have been in Wisconsin a year or so ago, and we hope at some point we can host the national conference in the future. As you heard in that brief bio there, my background and training was in vocational rehabilitation. So when I came to work with the AgrAbility Project in Wisconsin in the early 90s, I immediately saw some parallels to the work that we all do at AgrAbility in trying to help people maintain or continue their work as farmers. In other words, to stay employed in the job that they love. And at the heart of Voc Rehab, that's really what that's about, helping people either maintain, attain, or regain the employment that helps to benefit their lives and their families and for them to gain true value out of the work that they do. And in that essence, I think there's true overlap in the work that we all do. How we do it, the rules that govern what we do, and the priorities that either the VR programs or the AgrAbility programs in our states need to undertake are both set at the federal level, but they're also set at the state level. And it's another place I see parallels, that each of us, have the primary pieces that are in our applications as to how we're going to address them, but we come up with our own plans and goals as to how we're going to do that. And in that way, we're also somewhat parallel with programs. They're governed by a set of federal rules, but each state has a fair amount of latitude in how they might go about undertaking the work to meet the requirements that they would have in carrying out the VR program in each of their states. So oftentimes I'm asked questions in that regard in terms of people questioning why one state will do one thing and another state will do another. And my kind of canned answer to that is, if somebody looked at the AgrAbility projects, they might find similar things, and that we're undertaking different initiatives in different ways to achieve the same outcomes. And I think it helps for us as AgrAbility people to think about interacting with VR in the same way, that in our states, there might be nuances or differences, but that the end goal is to be able to try to help somebody maintain or attain their employment. What brought us to kind of this place, and Paul and I having a conversation a year ago about maybe we should talk about what the work group had been doing, was since the early 90s, actually before 1989, Wisconsin set up a partnership with the VR program here to work collaboratively to meet the needs of farmers with disabilities. So for a long period of time, we've worked in a collaborative manner to try to do the best we can on both sides of that equation to be able to meet the needs of the farmers and the communities that VR and AgrAbility mutually serve. When WIOA was implemented a few years back, the state VR program in Wisconsin here implemented something that they refer to as the existing business policy, which was somewhat geared around determining minimum wage and whether somebody was achieving minimum wage as a part of WIOA, which Paul will talk about what that is, required that in order to be closed successfully as a VR participant, you needed to be able to show minimum wage at the time of closure. That we shared concerns as an AgrAbility project, and it ended up being a significant barrier for many of the consumers that we were working collaboratively with. We went from serving a significant number of farmers down to a handful. And so we were in our state, we're talking with ag lenders and, all the players, the Farm Bureau, the ag extension people, the economists at the universities, the private lenders, the public lenders, the accountants, trying to figure out how would you go about determining minimum wage for a farmer and how might we present that in a different manner. And most of those individuals that worked with farmers on a regular basis shrugged their shoulders and kind of chuckled at us like, farmers don't work in the point of trying to get to a profit of a minimum wage. They work in a very intensive industry that requires a lot of capital, and oftentimes it's geared toward cash flow to meet the needs of either the accrual of that capital or the payment of that capital, or moving toward the next advancement. And in any business, but in agriculture, it seems to be even more so. If you have more cattle than the year before, or more beans or corn in the bin, or more acreage, that added to your bottom line and increased your overall net worth, but it doesn't necessarily increase your profitability from the point of cash flow, which ultimately is reflected in the terms of your minimum wage. So we were really struggling to try to come up with some alternative ways to present to the VR program that not only was, this going to be a difficult thing for the farmers to be able to meet the particular standard, we understood why they were undertaking it, meaning we understood why the VR program needed to do it. But this particular piece of WIOA just was not going to fit very well within the agricultural community. So I reached out to the National AgrAbility Project, and we started to have some conversations, and Paul put a wonderful group of people together to try to advance that conversation further, and he's going to share some of those outcomes with you. But as a part of that, I just wanted to share some generalities that in my tenure with AgrAbility, I've had the privilege and opportunity to work with a number of both AgrAbility projects and VR programs around the country, and I see some themes in that, and I want to just kind of put it out as my perspective that we all try to keep in mind from both sides of the equation as we figure out how can we work better together, how can we collaborate to meet the needs of the people that we serve. And to that end, as I already said, VR has similar goals as AgrAbility, as I already defined, but I think that from the AgrAbility side, we oftentimes get caught up in the passion of what it means for the farmer. All of us that are working on farms every day see how a disability impacts the workflow on a farm, how it can impact the family, how ultimately can lead to the loss of the family farm, and how critical that can be for the family unit and for the community that those farmers are working in. Because we see that every day, it doesn't make it more important to us, but it oftentimes makes it more real for us, and we have a stronger passion about that. And it's not that the local case manager who's working with individuals in the VR program may not see that, or that they may not have that same passion, but oftentimes when you're talking to administrators in the VR programs and trying to talk about the importance of serving these populations, when they're serving thousands or tens of thousands of people in their VR programs in a statewide basis that they're responsible for, if they're talking about 40 or 50 or 60 farmers that are coming in and wanting to be served, those are critical to us and they're very important. It's not that they're unimportant, but it's a very small piece of a very large puzzle. And oftentimes, I don't know that people from the AgrAbility side have that understanding of just how big and how diverse those programs are and the responsibilities that they have to meet the broader needs of the people with disabilities across the entire state who are working or who are trying to work or achieve a work basis. The other part of that is, at least from the AgrAbility side, we oftentimes get confused about disability versus business-related equipment. We all understand farms, and we understand that anything on a farm that can be used to make the job easier. But on the VR side of that, it's not their responsibility to buy business-related equipment for people just because they want it or because it can improve the function of their business. They have the opportunity, they could choose to do that. But from the point of an accommodation, it really needs to be disability-related equipment in order to accommodate a limitation that's presented or to remove or remediate a barrier that's presented as a result of a limitation associated with a disability in relation to a work impairment or a work task. Now, anything on a farm could be used. You could make the case for disability-related, but oftentimes the things that, that other states call about is, well, we won't purchase UTVs in our state, and we face that in our state currently as well. But the case is that a VR program can create a policy that limits what they expend their dollars on, and they can put limits on things like UTVs, but every policy has to have an exception based on federal law. And so if you run into that in your state and you really believe there's something that's, a piece of existing equipment that could remove, remediate a barrier, allow somebody to be successful, I'd encourage you to continue to work with the system, ask if there's an exception request, work on putting those exceptions together, building your case and putting your information in a way. My experience has been both in Wisconsin and across the country that the VR programs have a desire to be able to figure out a way to say yes, to be able to serve these populations, but oftentimes self-employed are outliers. They aren't the large caseloads that people work with in the VR programs, and most of the counselors don't have a great deal of experience within that. So I'm hopeful that what Paul can share with you, what Carrie can share with you as part of our work group, that hopefully we fleshed out some areas where SRAPs and VRs and workforce can understand how the WIO or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act have some parallels where we might be able to work collaboratively to continue to meet the needs of farmers. The VR program is a rich and diverse program that has an amazing amount of opportunity for people with disabilities to be able to be successful with the supports that are available through the VR programs. And that's not any different for a farmer. But it's incumbent on us as AgrAbility individuals to understand where those opportunities are and to match them up with the individuals that we're serving, to find places where the VR programs can be plugged in to fill those gaps of service, to be able to support the individuals and to allow them to continue to be successful. And it's not any different in this area working with VR than it is for an AgrAbility individual working with other systems, other service providers. We need to understand how these different issues that impact both sides of the equation, not only how it impacts us or our consumer, how it impacts the other side of the equation, the other part of the system we're working with, and then look for the opportunities or the places of crossover where we can work more collaboratively in order to help our consumers, joint consumers, achieve a positive outcome. Paul, I think that's the end of my remarks.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Did you cover everything on this slide that you wanted to cover? I'll go ahead and move on then.
Okay.
Okay, I want to give you some background on our response to some of the things that Paul had mentioned earlier. Several years ago, some of our state and regional AgrAbility projects, which we refer to as SRAPs, were having increasing difficulty getting the services that they wanted for their clients. And again, most of those issues at that time related back to the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is commonly known as WIOA. And as Paul mentioned, specifically, one of the main issues was that under WIOA, there was a need to show that the VR client had earned minimum wage in order to have a successful case closure. So our goal in getting a group together to talk about this was, first of all, to understand what these regulations were, what specifically WIOA said, and then ultimately how all those regulations related to the SRAPs and to VR and how all those things meshed together. So we started out with individual discussions. Paul was a catalyst in the beginning for getting those going, and we did have an all-staff call back more than 2 years ago to talk about some of these things. And almost 2 years ago, we did a web survey to try to quantify some of the issues that the SRAPs were dealing with, so that we could have a concise list to work from. So after those, we got our working group functioning on a more regular basis. The people on that group included staff from the National AgrAbility Project here at Purdue, and also our VR consultant on the national project, Steve Etheridge, who was a longtime VR counselor in Indiana. Paul, of course, from AgrAbility Wisconsin. We've had staff from the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation, which is known as CSAVR. And that's a membership organization that the state heads of VR belong to. Now, the state heads did not actually participate on our working group, but the staff from CSAVR did provide input. Carrie Wilson and some other VR staff from around the state and some of the consultants that they work with in farm cases have participated. And then we did have a couple of calls that involved the Workforce Innovation Technical Assistance Center, WINTAC, which existed at San Diego State University for the purpose of helping VR counselors know how to appropriately function under WIOA. Our goal or goals for getting this group together were mainly twofold. First of all, we wanted to provide guidance to VR counselors on not only how they could serve farmers and ranchers, but why they should serve them. In terms of how, we wanted to kind of create a pathway or roadmap that would help them navigate through WIOA to meet that regulation or the regulations in that act and still be able to serve farmers. And then also wanting to stress the level of success that we've had in AgrAbility in working with VR and serving farmers, both statistically overall, and then some individual success stories that illustrate how important VR is to our AgrAbility clients. Along with that, we wanted to let the SRAPs and our clients know the best ways to work with VR, especially as it relates to WIOA. What types of information do you need to provide? How do you go about getting that information together? That type of thing. So those were our main goals. In our process, what we've done, first of all, we consolidated information from the calls that we had, working group calls, and from the states when they participated in the online survey and our all staff call. We've compiled those, done some drafts of a white paper, and hopefully have what we consider at least a relatively final version. We are now in the process of seeing if we can get that reviewed and vetted through the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, which is the federal head organization over the VR program. CSAVR is looking at some options for doing that. It's a little complicated right now, partly because there is no permanent RSA commissioner under the Biden administration yet. There's an acting commissioner. The previous commissioner had been the VR head in Nebraska at one time, and we were hopeful that maybe he would have a chance to review this, but that did not occur. So we're moving forward with seeing what we can do under getting it reviewed from RSA. Just a few basic conclusions that we've come to since we started meeting, and these are all outlined in a lot more detail in our white paper, but self-employment is not common for most VR counselors to deal with. I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's a very small percentage of VR cases. And when you look at agricultural cases as a subset, it's even more unusual for VR counselors. So VR counselors are not going to be an expert in self-employment in general, and even less probability that they will be experts in agricultural self-employment. Another issue, which is actually kind of important, is that the term self-employment itself can be a bit misleading because when some VR counselors hear self-employment, they think startup and they need a business plan and we need to go through, all these hoops. But in the cases of our AgrAbility clients, what we're dealing with almost every time is an established business that just happens to be a self-employment situation. And what our ag clients really need, for the most part, is assistive technology. So the idea of self-employment may scare off some VR counselors right at the start, but it doesn't necessarily need to do that. Another thing that's important is to understand that it's not atypical at all for farmers to show little profit or even loss, and that may be intentional. There are definite tax advantages to that, but when you're looking at trying to fulfill the requirements of WIOA, that's a definite disadvantage because you need to show profitability under WIOA. Which leads to the important concept that viability and profitability are very different things. Viability would be the general overall financial health of an enterprise. Profitability means what are you showing on your bottom line and your tax forms, and those can be very different. A farm that shows little or no profitability may still be very viable. It just may be recorded and expressed in different ways. So obviously, farm finance is complex. I don't claim to understand it very well, and so people that don't deal with it on a regular basis probably won't, and that includes most VR counselors. But it is important to emphasize that you can't really understand the financial health of an agricultural enterprise just by looking at something like the Form F or Schedule F on a tax form that shows, profit and loss on the bottom line. It's much more complex than that. It's also important to point out that we found nothing in regulations that indicates that you need to show profitability before you get VR services, and that was a concern in some cases. In many cases, you may need the VR services before profitability can fully be seen. So there is no requirement, right up front that you show a profit before getting VR services. It's also important to note that self-employment or self-report is an acceptable means of demonstrating minimum wage. There's a circular from RSA that lists about 8 different ways of showing minimum wage, and sometimes it's through the unemployment insurance system, which farmers generally don't participate in, or from W-2 forms or things like that may not be available for farmers. But there are other methods, such as self-report, to establish that under WIOA. There is latitude. There is an opportunity for VR agencies to either be inclusive or to be exclusive. Different interpretations of these regulations can go either way in some cases, at least to a certain degree. And we understand that there are pressures to be exclusive. There is definitely a shortage, or at least a definite restriction on the amount of funding that is available. We know that part of that funding is already earmarked, for example, to transitioning youth. And we know that states are in order of selection. But it's important to understand that if there is a desire to be inclusive, we believe that there is the potential to be inclusive of agricultural clients under WIOA. So in terms of what we're planning to do, again, we're looking at getting hopefully this reviewed by RSA, but if that's not the case, we're still planning to distribute our findings through this white paper. We're planning to have a more extensive webinar to go through it in more detail. CSA VR has indicated that they have some potential opportunities through their networking calls, which they have monthly, to present some of this information. They've got a conference and webinars that could also be potential sources sources of distribution. We want to get it directly to the VR agencies, the state VR agencies, and there's also a Vocational Rehabilitation Technical Assistance Center for Quality Management. And again, that may be another avenue for getting the information out. At this point, Carrie Wilson, who I mentioned has been part of our group, is going to share some specifics about how her state addresses agricultural clients and specifically AgrAbility clients. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to Carrie.
And Paul, why don't I just do a quick introduction for Carrie? I didn't read her bio at the beginning, if that's okay. Carrie Wilson has been employed by Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation since 1994. She began her career as a VR counselor, was promoted to district supervisor, served in the role of regional manager, and was recently promoted to coordinator of client services. Whoops, there goes my screen. Carrie Wilson completed her PhD in social work in 2009 from the University of Missouri. So welcome, Carrie.
Thank you. I was trying to get myself unmuted and get my screen sharing. So can you all see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. As mentioned, I'm Carrie Wilson, and I am currently the coordinator for client services for Missouri Vocational Rehabilitation. Many of you, I assume, are somewhat familiar with VR services. There is a VR program in every state in the United States. And our mission and our purpose is to help individuals with disabilities to become competitively employed. So at VR, we serve a very wide range of people from all ages, all different cultures, all different disability types, and with a lot of different types of limitations and a lot of unique career goals. But the bottom line is our primary purpose is to help those individuals to become competitively employed. Today, I get the privilege of talking to you a little bit about specifically how Missouri VR works with and serves our farmers and ranchers. So what we have done about 8 years ago in Missouri, with an understanding that, of course, we realize how important farmers and ranchers are to Missouri's economy. And we also realized how important they are to our culture and our way of life. And so we had a desire to provide very high quality services to farmers and ranchers who may have suffered or had a disability and needed our assistance. But we also quickly realized that that could be, as Paul and Paul have already mentioned, a little bit complex. And in general, our VR counselors do not have a high degree of understanding of farming or agricultural occupations. And so in order to kind of help overcome that problem, we created a Missouri Farm Services team. And on that team, we have Ray Drake, who was a VR counselor and then a VR supervisor and is now retired, but he is also a farmer. He's farming full-time now, I guess that he's retired, but he comes back and helps us on that team as a consultant, and he's available as needed. And then we also have Rob Surface, who is a VR district supervisor who had experience working on a farm, lives in a rural community, and is kind of in tune with the farming way of life. And then myself, who may not exactly look like a farmer, and I do spend my days working in an office as a member of an executive team for VR, but who I really am at heart and at my core is a farmer's daughter. So I was born and raised on a large row crop farm in mid-Missouri. All of my ancestors were farmers. My dad has never had a job off of the farm. And so it's really been a way of life for me. And as an adult, even though I pursued a career here at VR, I also for about 10 years owned and operated a broiler farm where we raised chickens for Tyson Foods. So those experiences have allowed me to kind of combine my career and love for the VR program with my history and love for farmers. So we created this team. We are expanding our team. We're constantly looking for folks out in our field offices who have a passion for farming or just a desire to learn more. And so I'm excited to say we have a couple of new members identified that will soon be working with us on our team. But what we focus on as a team is really serving as that primary point of contact for our AgrAbility staff here in Missouri. We have a first name basis with those folks and cell phone numbers exchanged, and we really have keep pretty good close contact with our friends and partners over at AgrAbility. We also provide support and consultation to the VR counselors. That's probably our primary role within the agency. As we mentioned, the VR counselor won't necessarily have a full understanding immediately when a farmer may come in their office needing their assistance. So they consult with us. We usually talk with them about every case that may come up for them. And then we also are available to go out and visit the farm with the VR counselor. We're available to review any kind of assessments or reports that may come in on that farmer. And we also help look at the financial records, which Paul and Paul were just talking about. That's one of the biggest complexity for a VR counselor in serving a farmer, is trying to understand those farmers' taxes and financial situation, because it is important and required by us that those farmers meet our eligibility requirements for financials, and also that they are earning a wage or living on their farm. So, and then another thing that we do that is a little bit unique in Missouri is that we conduct training for our staff, and we do some smaller trainings, but every couple of years we have been having a combined training with Missouri VR staff and our partners over at AgrAbility, and also some of our vendors who make some of the equipment for our farmers. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a couple minutes. I wanted to talk just a little bit specifically about the VR farm team and then our partnership with AgrAbility, and why I feel like that has been very successful. For one thing, we really value what AgrAbility does for our farmers. We fully recognize the resources and expertise that our clients can seek out from the AgrAbility program. So we value and appreciate that. We also have established a fee-for-service agreement with our AgrAbility program here in Missouri. So we authorize funding for AgrAbility to complete an on-site farm assessment for us. And that is critical in the VR counselor being able to understand what the farmer needs and wants, and which items will specifically help them overcome the limitations of their disability and be able to go back to working on their farm. So that's a very critical and key piece of our success, is that assessment that the AgrAbility staff here in Missouri will come out to the farm and provide for us. And then we also try to collaborate and attend events together. We've kind of reached out and expanded our network a little bit to include our Missouri Farm Bureau program and some of our extension offices. But in general, VR and AgrAbility, we try to attend events together. We've, the last 6 or 7 years, spent several days each spring at the Western Missouri Farm Show, which is the largest farm show in Missouri, and sitting next to each other for those days, talking to the people who come through. But we get to talk about our services. We also get to talk to each other a lot. So again, we just developed that real strong partnership and even friendship with the folks over at the AgrAbility program. And then I mentioned earlier the training that we do. I just want to share a quick picture here. This is the last farm services training that we did, has been hosted at my parents' farm. We allow any VR staff person who wants to come to that training, be it someone from the executive team to a support staff person to a VR counselor. They come for 2 days, and we spend it on the farm the entire time. We have a little bit of classroom information where, VR may speak, our friends at AgrAbility will speak. We all have a chance to network and talk. And then we spend a lot of our time actually on the farm, seeing the farmers at work. And so far, it's always worked out. The weather has been good. We've been able to ride. We plan this event usually around harvest time. Each participant in the training has been able to ride in a combine, harvesting corn. We've been able to ride and operate and drive an ATV, a side-by-side. So we've been able to observe the process of bringing the grain into the grain bin. and look at some lifts like from Life Essentials, some of those adaptive pieces of equipment that can help a farmer. So really what we're trying to do is just, even though the VR counselor may not have ever seen a farm, they may not know a lot about farming, but spending those 2 days on a farm really helps them see how complex the job is. We also have farmers actually come and speak, and they're the ones who give the tours and give the rides in the combine and such. So they get to meet these farmers, hear their stories, see them in action, and see the equipment and the complexity of the job. And so I think they really return back to their office in whatever part of the state they're in with a much better understanding and even some passion for serving the next farmer that may happen to come through their doors. So I probably already have covered this, but why I think our partnership works so well in Missouri is just simply the fact that we share a mission and some common values. We both want to help our farmers. We have very open and really instant communication because we do know each other. I can text or call someone and get a response pretty quickly from the AgrAbility program, and I hope they feel the same, that they can reach out to one of us on the farm team and have instant communication. We do sit down when necessary and talk about any issues or concerns that might come up. Again, we go out to the farm sometimes together. We always try, when AgrAbility is going to be conducting a farm assessment for us, we try to have a VR staff person present, whether it's one of us from the farm team or the local VR counselor. We know and feel very confident in the quality of the product that the AgrAbility program produces for us here in Missouri. We very much look forward to their assessments and the report that comes along with that. And then, as I mentioned, we just genuinely have a friendship and a partnership because we share our passion for helping farmers continue to farm. And just real quick, I think that obviously we have a great partnership, but what the result of that is that the farmers and ranchers are the ones who benefit here in Missouri. Just a few things that have come to my mind. There's so many more, but some recent things that have been purchased are provided by Missouri VR to our farmers. Again, those on-site farm assessments to help identify what they need. We have purchased and do fairly regularly purchase an ATV for a client when it's appropriate and when it's necessary for them to overcome their limitations. Of course, things like gate openers, bale bed, cattle panels, truck modifications, hand controls, the Life Essentials lifts, all-terrain wheelchairs. We have paid for some dog training so that a farm dog could assist a farmer with very specific disability-related tasks. And then we provide that consultation and guidance and counseling to our clients. So in 2018, Missouri VR served 40 farmers and spent $359,000, and we had 40 successful employment outcomes for our farmers. I need to get some updated statistics, but that's very much within the average range of what we would do every year as far as numbers of clients served. So as we move forward, the Missouri Farm Team is just going to continue to focus on serving Missouri farmers and ranchers. We're going to continue that strong partnership with our AgrAbility program and always reaching out to other agricultural groups in our state that might be able to provide resources or support. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're growing and developing that next generation of the VR Farm Team so that here in Missouri, we don't allow ourselves to slide backwards or to forget where we've come from and how passionate we need to be about serving farmers and ranchers through the VR program. And that's all I have. I'll stop my screen sharing and.
Thank you, Carrie. I had lots of questions. I don't see anything in the chat box. I do have a question if I could just ask. Is there funding for the VR Farm Team at all? Is there specific funding?
No, we don't have it. No, we just do our work on the farm team as part of our other duties as assigned. And so we have the capacity to travel and to, again, provide the training that I mentioned comes out of our general VR training budget. So we don't have a specific budget for our team. We just operate as we would performing any of our other duties.
Wow, that was pretty great. Pretty great. I do see a question here from Eileen. from Tennessee, do you work closely with VA VR cases?
We are more than happy to, and we have had a couple of VA client veterans who have come to us needing some VR assistance, and we have partnered some on those cases. What comes to mind off the top of my head is an urban farmer who had a pretty large scale vegetable growing operation, and he was a veteran, and we together kind of helped him turn that into a little bit more of a marketable business. So we're open to it. It doesn't happen a lot, but we certainly can.
Okay. And Emily from Nebraska asks, how do you set up VR on farm trainings? Are they at different places around your state or all at one location?
Well, what has worked so far is that I have primarily set that up at my parents' farm, and it's just very conducive. They have a large shop that's makes a great classroom, and then we have access to livestock farmers near us, the row crop that's on their farm. But I think that we certainly would like to expand to other locations, and if you were thinking of doing something similarly, any location will work but what I really like about ours is the opportunity for the participants to actually observe the farming as it's going on. And we have been there when it's extremely hot, abnormally hot. We've been there when it's chilly at the time of year. So we just go no matter what the weather conditions, because that's what farmers do. So it doesn't have to be the perfect setting, I don't think, but someplace that's conducive to being able to see hands-on a variety of farming operations is probably ideal.
Emily says, we have just had a hard time in the past getting VR counselors to come to these. Do you have any suggestions on how to entice people?
I think the best suggestion I have is it is about those relationships. And if you can, I know that's easier said than done, but if you can make a connection with somebody in the VR program in your state, whether that's a counselor or administrator, even someone in a support role, if you can start to develop those relationships, I think that's what will make the people come, And so for us at VR actually hosts and kind of conducts the training. So our staff are more comfortable probably coming. They're just signing up for a VR training. But I think the AgrAbility could just as easily host the training if you have those connections and relationships, and you can reach out to your contacts at VR and say, hey, bring your people. We've got this exciting training opportunity.
Do you offer any CEUs for these trainings?
Yes, we do. And I'm not the one in charge of that, but we are able to get CEU certificates for our participants.
Okay. I am being nudged to move on to the next presenter. So let's see. Who is
Thank you all.
Thanks, Carrie. I believe Mackenzie's up next. See if I can, is that correct?
I can go next. That's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So Mackenzie Thomas is going to be our next presenter from Texas AgrAbility program. Mackenzie has been a program coordinator for Texas AgrAbility since 2015, after graduating from Texas A&M University with a degree in agricultural leadership and development. She grew up on a fifth-generation hay and cattle operation in East Texas and acquired a disability after a car accident in 2010. She utilizes her shared experiences in her role at Texas AgrAbility, coordinating farm and ranch assessments, client case management, and facilitating client and partner relationships. So welcome, Mackenzie.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thanks for having us today. Like she said, I'm Mackenzie Thomas. I'm here with the Texas AgrAbility Project. And I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about our experience with vocational rehab here in Texas. When I talk about vocational rehab, I'm referring to the state's vocational rehab, not necessarily the VA's vocational rehab. We do have a little bit of experience working with them, but it's more on a training scenario with business planning training rather than farm and ranch assessments and assistive technology. So just to preface that. But one of the big things that we have done in our state, similar to what Carrie was talking about in Missouri, is that we have developed a contract that's like a fee-for-service with our state's vocational rehab to kind of put in place some formalized assessment protocols that includes the written recommendation report that we submit. And that's really kind of solidified a partnership with vocational rehab and allowed us to kind of have a formal process for doing that. So we include in that formal recommendation, there's always an occupational therapist and an engineer that accompanies us for those assessments so that, you know, we have the expertise there, and that's written in that contract. And then this also gives us the ability to cover travel costs. Our state is pretty large. We recently did a couple of assessments in the Panhandle, and it was, you know, some flights, so that contract allows us to bill for some travel to get everyone there. As well as there's kind of another piece to our contract that helps cover some of the business planning. A lot of times, I know a lot of farmers and ranchers may be established farmers and ranchers that have had their operations for many, many years, but we also work with a lot of veteran and beginning farmers and ranchers who utilize vocational rehab. So a business plan is necessary for their case to progress. So especially individuals who have traumatic brain injuries or PTSD, getting a business plan together might be extra challenging for them. So one of the pieces of this contract that we have with vocational rehab is to assist with the business planning. So we take the templates that they need and try to adapt the farm and ranch plan for our clients into the format that they need and to satisfy all the requirements that they have. So that kind of reduces the barrier for our new and beginning farmers and ranchers. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, with every state, I'm sure there's a lot of challenges that come with working with vocational rehab. And one of the main things we've seen is that it takes a lot of time. It can be a very lengthy process, like they were talking about earlier. It's not something that VR counselors are typically used to working with. So we have, tried to set up some reasonable expectation with our clients working with vocational rehab, because there is a lot of time and paperwork involved, a lot of forms, a lot of justification needed on the amount of money spent versus the amount of income that the farmer or rancher is expecting to have. And this is especially challenging for beginning farmers and ranchers. So we try to work with them individually on their business plan and justifying dollars spent and making sure before we refer to vocational rehab that it's something that we have a reasonable expectation it could be successful. That's another thing that has helped us, I think, in getting successful cases with vocational rehab is we have a referral process. So we have a form that's been created in partnership with VR to actually refer clients that are just starting out. And that allows us to kind of connect with their counselor and their field office from the beginning so that they know who we are. They know kind of why the client is coming to them for services. So that's really helped us out in maintaining a successful relationship through the duration of that client's case. Some of the successes that we've had even recently is we were approved to do virtual assessments during COVID. So whenever COVID happened, we contacted our people at VR and asked about the opportunity to still continue to do assessments, even if we couldn't get the entire team there in person. And so they actually approved us to do a virtual assessment. We haven't done necessarily a completely virtual assessment. We'll have like 1, maybe 2 staff members go on site, and then we join through Zoom or FaceTime to get the other parties involved. But we did get that approved through VR beforehand. We've also had some successful cases in getting exemptions for the cost of some equipment. The individual I'm thinking of was a military veteran that had some veteran benefits. So of course there's, basic living requirements that are in place. And if an individual in our state makes, income above certain living requirements, they're expected to pay a portion of that assistive technology cost. And so for this individual, it was a very significant amount. I think like 80 or 90% of the cost. And so, but as you know, when you're working on a farm, that's not necessarily something that you can afford to do. And so they were granted an exemption for that to kind of help offset those costs. We've also had some support. Typically in the past, if the individual was not a full-time farmer rancher or part-time looking to move into full-time, vocational rehab would not support their farming endeavors. Like if they were a teacher or had some other occupation but were wanting to be a farmer, they would not support them to move from one type of employment to another, because their goal is to keep the person employed. Recently we did have some support for a client moving into full-time farming who had previously had just an 8-to-5 job, but there was no opportunity for career advancement. Whereas on the farm, he could show that he could advance in his career and continue to have viable employment after that. So we had some support for kind of moving him from one type of employment to another. And also, there's been a lot of struggle with getting equipment purchased, and vendors and approved vendor lists and who they can purchase equipment from as vocational rehab and with the state. And so we recently also were able to have a reimbursement option for the client. So the client was able to, like, for example, there's a piece of equipment that's only available through Tractor Supply online. And VR says we do not purchase equipment online. It has to be from a store. Well, Tractor Supply does not carry that specific equipment in store. So the client was actually able to purchase the equipment themselves and then submit for reimbursement after the fact, so that VR could reimburse them for the purchase of the equipment, but they got the equipment they needed. So that was a great success kind of in the past year that removed that barrier for a lot of our clients with pieces of equipment that are a little harder to source, especially if there's a company that, makes a specific type of equipment and they are not on their approved vendor list. It was really difficult to source that for them. So this option might remove that barrier for the clients in the future. So just a few things of what we've learned. Mind you, I've only been here for 5 or 6 years, and there were years of experiences before this. Our workforce commission acquired vocational rehab services probably 3 or 4 years ago. It used to be housed under the Department of Rehab Services. So there was a lot of shifting in how dollars were spent and the kind of where their focus was at that point. So just in my time here, that has changed a lot. But some things that are pretty standard that we feel like helps a successful client case is to just set realistic expectations. If we know that typically cases may last 2 or 3 years, while it may be difficult to, tell a new client, yeah, you may not get this equipment for a couple of years, it's better to set the realistic expectation at that point than to lead them to believe that, it could be quick and then have their disappointment when it takes longer than expected. We've seen that if we set pretty realistic expectations about the time and, the amount of forms they're going to have to fill out and information that they're going to need to provide, they're a lot more successful in the long run because they just know what to expect from the beginning. We've also had clients that say, I don't want to go that route, and then we can go ahead and move in another direction. And so that saves a lot of headache and hassle for everyone involved when we do that at the beginning. Another thing is we try to, with our case management, help the client stay accountable. So if we know that there is certain steps they need to take in order to have a successful case closure, and they need to provide certain information and forms, we try to check in with them and make sure that they are staying accountable to their VR counselor and their case to help progress their case as well. And we also try to include VR counselors and staff, whether that's an assistive technology professional, their regional supervisor, the counselor, at the assessment, if at all possible. We found that if we can include them in that assessment and let them actually come out to the farm and see the tasks that the individual is doing and ways that those certain tasks have barriers and challenges for them, then it just kind of gives them a more personal view of the client and what they're looking at, because typically our VR counselors may not have ever been to a farm, seen a farm. They likely don't have experience in that area, so it gives them a little bit of background on the individual and their tasks and how those types of things play into their ability to stay employed through self-employment. So a couple of other things I wanted to kind of touch on was that we do work with military veterans through the state's vocational rehab, not just the VA's vocational rehab. So many of our veteran clients don't realize that even though they have the opportunity to work with the VA's vocational rehab, they also have the state's vocational rehab available to them as well. So there is some coordination of services that takes place whenever you're working with a veteran that utilizes vocational rehab, but we've had several successful case closures and assistive technology equipment type things funded through the state's vocational rehab, not just the VA. We've had some support from the VA's vocational rehab with business planning education and training, not necessarily assistive technology at this point, but that's something that we hope to kind of explore and figure out in the future. And then we also have connected with, I don't know how other states work, but we've connected with, they have self-employment specialists. And I love what Carrie is doing with her state's vocational rehab. And I want to kind of bring that up to our state as well with like a farm team. But there are regional self-employment specialists. And so when there's questions with self-employment cases, they typically go up to that individual, which are typically VR counselors as well. And so we have tried to make sure to connect with those individuals and offer them, any kind of consultation they need on self-employment for farmers and ranchers to kind of help mitigate a lot of those barriers that people are having when utilizing VR for self-employment. So here's my contact information. And then I guess if you have any questions, or we can save those till later. We need to move on.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I don't see anything right now in the chat box, so we will move on, and I'll introduce Mason. Mason Dean is the service coordinator for the University of Georgia's AgrAbility project. Mason has worked with AgrAbility in Georgia since 2015. Based on the Tifton campus, Mason provides direct technical assistance to farmers and ranchers with disabilities in South Georgia by making recommendations on AT, worksite assessments, assisting with locating and navigating funding sources, and business development. Mason helps ensure that farmers and ranchers with disabilities in South Georgia can continue to run their operations. Mason grew up near Barnesville, Georgia, which is in Middle Georgia. I didn't know there was a South Georgia and a Middle Georgia. And attended college at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, majoring in rural economics and business development. Before working with AgrAbility, Mason worked as a field research technician for the USDA's Agricultural Research Services, conducting research on bioenergy crops and monitoring the watershed quality network for the Little and Suwannee River watersheds. Welcome, Mason.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, can everyone see my screen correctly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. All right, good afternoon, or I think morning for some people actually on the call right now. Like I said, my name is Mason Dean. I am the South Georgia AgrAbility Service Coordinator for Georgia AgrAbility. And I'm just going to kind of share with you all today about how we work with our vocational rehabilitation agency here and what we've done to improve relations over the years. So just a quick note, the goal of our AgrAbility project in Georgia is to promote independence for agricultural workers with chronic health conditions and disabilities. And we do this by providing clients with vital education, assistance, and support to farmers and ranchers with disabilities. Likewise, the reason I brought that up was kind of the goal and for Georgia Vocational Rehabilitation Agency is that they operate in 5 integrated and interdependent programs that share a primary goal, which is to help people with disabilities to become fully productive members of society by achieving independence and meaningful employment. And so when we think of meaningful employment, we don't just think of a job that someone has, but also a job that they're interested in and they want to pursue as their career. And as all vocational rehabilitation acts, ours was established in 1973 by the Rehabilitation Act. So every state across the nation has a similar vocational rehab program. So since 2005, Georgia AgrAbility and GVRA have partnered to provide services to farmers and ranchers in Georgia. Those services include assistance with attaining assistive technology, business startup capital, and worksite modifications. Of the clients we've served here at Georgia AgrAbility, approximately about 30% of them are referred to GVRA for further services. So I'm going to kind of go through our whole process of an AgrAbility and GVRA client. So once we have a client that has been referred to AgrAbility, which is the typical process, typically they're referred to AgrAbility first, we're going to do our Aggregability intake with them, which is where they call and we get all their vital information we need before we actually establish a site visit. And now once on the site visit, it's going to be designated to 1 or 2 coordinators in the state, myself in South Georgia, and then actually Kyle Haney, who has done some presentations recently as well, who is located in North Georgia on the Athens campus. And during that site visit, what we're going to do is we're going to look over our clients' farms and view their tasks, much like everyone else is doing on their site visits. And we're also going to share information about these different agencies, funding sources, and typically VR is one of the main ones we discuss with our clients. And once we've done this, if a client is actually meets the criteria for a vocational rehabilitation client as well, then that's where we're going to get the information to make that referral, and we're going to make that referral to VR. Once we've referred somebody to VR, then they're going to have their actual intake with vocational rehab separate of what we've done. So VR is going to make contact with that client. And here in the state of Georgia, they actually use a letter as the first notice of contact. So they're going to send our clients a letter And it's going to have a time and a day and a phone number if that time and day doesn't work, and they will actually reschedule to do that intake with them. Once an intake has been done, we're going to know who their client's counselor is. So at that point, that's when we start getting in contact with vocational rehab more heavily and talking about the recommendations we have for our clients. So at that point, we've conducted the site visit, we've completed a referral, and we've actually done our assistive technology recommendations, which you'll see kind of a template of our form on the next slide over. And we're going to share that AT recommendations with the counselor at that point in time. When the counselor has done that, they're also going to make a referral to our state has Vocational Rehab AWT, which is Assistive Work Technologies within their agency. So they're going to make that referral to that organization or that program within vocational rehab. And then the AWT is actually going to set up a separate site visit with the client. And on that site visit, we're going to attend that site visit as well, if at all possible, as long as we're, in the loop on what's going on. We have gotten to the point where we're pretty much familiar with everybody who works in AWT at our vocational rehabilitation. So we usually know everything that's coming up with our clients that are within their programs. And when we do that site visit with them, we're going to have already shared with them also that AT recommendations for them. And that form actually closely represents the form that they create within their systems at vocational rehab. So we're just kind of, looking at things and making sure that they see things that we've seen and have all those on hand so that when they go to do their reports, they're already ahead of the game, that they don't have to sit back and do everything from scratch. We've already gave them the actual items that we're recommending. We gave them the justifications for it and everything else, so that just internally, it's really saved them a lot of time and a lot of work. And once we've done that and we've went and done the site visit with AWT and we've agreed what is reasonable and what's justified for the client, that's when we're going to start gathering our quotes for the different items that we've recommended. And those quotes are gathered from all the different agencies or organizations that we're working with, different vendors. Some vendors we have to actually establish in the vendor system if it's a new one, but we've gotten pretty good. Most of our vendors are already established that we're going to work with. And then we do run into cases where we just can't get a vendor established. We do have some vendors who will actually purchase and drop ship those items for us, is what we call it. So we'll actually work with them to do the purchase separately, and VR actually does pays them to purchase it and sends it to the counselor or to the client who's receiving it. So once we've gathered all that, then we have to wait for the authorizations. And we have different levels of authorizing the assistive technology or whatever we've recommended for the client. And it's all dependent on the overall cost of the item. So some items up to a certain cost, counselors can approve directly, while other ones may have to go to next level up to their supervisor or even their supervisor above that, depending on the overall cost. So again, here we're getting very heavily involved when these items start being purchased. We're actually going to be there ensuring that they're delivered properly. If there's anything that needs to be installed that we're responsible for installing, we're going to make sure it's installed correctly and follow up to make sure everything's working during that time span. And then also during that time span, VR is monitoring the case once everything's been done. So that's typically about a 90-day process as far as VR is concerned, that they're going to monitor that client for 90 days, overviewing how they're doing, making sure that they're actually doing what they said they were going to be doing, that everything's working for them, and that they're actually, able to continue working like they are. And once that's completed, if everything's gone well, everything's done, then VR is actually going to close their case at that point. Now, at that point, we don't ever close our clients' cases. We keep them it's basically a state that we call inactive if we're not actively working with them. But at any point in time, a previous client may become active again. So we always just keep all that information on hand quickly. That way, if somebody comes back up, we can go right back to them and working with them like we were before. And also, if we need to go back to VR about something, we already have everything ready on hand in case there were to need to be a reason to go back to vocational rehab. So, and in order to do this, we all think about forms. We all have forms. We have forms internally. GVRA has forms internally. And then we have forms we share between us. So there's 4 main forms that we share between us and GVRA, and 2 of those are actually GVRA forms, and 2 of those are our actual forms. So we keep on hand our GVRA referral forms at all times. So when we're on a client's farm, we're going to have a copy of that on hand, and we're also going to have their release of information form on hand at all times. So when we go to a client's farm and we do make that assessment that they are going to qualify for vocational rehabilitation services, we can go ahead and fill out that referral form that day and send it in. Likewise, that release of information form is hugely important for us to be able to support our clients. Without that, we can't talk to GVRA on our client's behalf. So we just go ahead and get them to do that too. When we do that, and then we can send in both those forms at the same time. That way, you know, we can clearly communicate with GVRA about the client's needs. And then secondly, we have a couple forms that we use with every client. We use one of these regardless of whether they are a VR client or not. And that's the AWT recommendations. And then the second form is just a quote sheet that we provide to vocational rehab if we're quoting to do anything for them. As some states have said, they actually have a fee for service for doing the assessments for vocational rehab. Here in Georgia, we don't have that option. So we do have some other services that we can provide to vocational rehab that we charge for that. So in that AWT recommendation form, we're going to start with an actual background and overview of the farmer. So this could be, what is their operation? What disabilities or chronic health conditions do they have? And how are they functioning? And then secondly, we're going to go into their actual equipment on the farm. So that's going to be, what type of tractors do they use, or what type of other equipment do they use on the farm? And do we need to do any modifications to those? And we'll list those modifications out beside it. We also list things like frequency of how often that piece of equipment is used. If a tractor or a farmer has multiple tractors, are there any tractors that are more important than others to their operation? Basically, if we're in a situation VR may only modify one tractor, we need to designate which tractor is going to be the most beneficial for the client to use on that farm. And then we actually go into a lot of our other assistive technology recommendations in here. And this is where we're getting into the meat of making justifications based off of a client's disability. And during this time, we're also going ahead and putting in vendors that we have approved for these items beforehand. That way just makes it more simple for making sure that everything lines up when it gets to VR's hands and they're writing their AWT recommendations. And then secondly, on the quotes. So I brought this up briefly just a few seconds ago. We quote a lot for vocational rehab to do a lot of services with the clients. We had a lot of issues here in the state of Georgia getting vendors lined up to do installations, or if we need a custom fabrication done or anything like that. We just didn't have a lot of people on hand to do that. So what we did was we came up with a method through us to be able to do that. So we will actually go out and do installations of the automatic gate operators. If people have fence line feeders to be installed, we'll assemble equipment such as calf catchers. We install rear view cameras on a lot of tractors. We do that. And we charge for all that. And then if they need something custom fabricated, such as like a step extension, or if we need to make custom brackets for mounting something, some type of modification, or any other needs that may arise, we have a shop here in Tifton. It's actually just right behind my wall in my office here. And we can go back there and we can fabricate most anything within reason that we need to fabricate. There's obviously certain things that we're not going to fabricate. We don't fabricate lifts. We're not going to compete with the vendors that we work with often. So, you know, there's certain things that we're not going to do here. There's liability issues for doing certain things. So there's just, you know, within reason, we can do a lot here. There's certain things we won't. And then I'm going to kind of talk about, this has come up a little bit, is trainings. So we've done a few different trainings with VR members and different VR teams. And one of the biggest and most successful ones that we did was we did an assistive work technology staff training. And it was a 2-day training. We hosted all of the GVR AWT staff, except for one member that was just happened to be sick that day. And the way we managed this is we actually got in contact with the head of the AWT staff at that time and really pushed it for him to approve this training for all his staff. And so once he approved it, they all actually came down here to Tifton. And the way we set this up was this 2-day training. The first day was mostly in classroom. And during that in-class session, we talked about farming, we talked about farm culture, we talked about farm equipment, and just basically a wide range of topics regarding farming. And we also talked about the Aggregability program and how we function and how we can work with vocational rehab to help ensure success of these cases that go to vocational rehab and the clients that we serve. And then on that first day, we actually went out to an outdoor space. And we had several of the different vendors we work with. So y'all can see we had Life Essentials there. They brought a truck lift. We had a track chair dealer there. We had a equipment manufacturer there, JCB. We just like their side entry, and they were willing to come up there and kind of show that off. And it's how it's, advantageous for clients to use that. We had some equipment we owned personally, or not personally, but we owned through the University of Georgia there. We had a tractor there that we had installed quick hitches on and backup cameras. And our AWT staff actually got to go out and experience the items. They got to spend time on them. They got to talk to the vendors. They got to talk to some farmers that were actually there who used some of these items. So it's just hugely beneficial for them to understand the need of certain types of items that, we may not see typically every day on a farm. And then the next day, what we actually did was we went out on farms. So we went to 4 different farms the following day. One of them was ran by the university. The rest of them were private farms. And the AWT staff actually got to spend time doing different tasks, or at least observing tasks on the farm. That could have been anything from harvesting produce to watching people work with livestock. We visited a large pecan orchard operation, and they got to learn about just how labor intensive those different jobs were. And then we even looked at an operation that had a lot of processing after they had went through the whole farming. They had a lot of processing to do afterward. And we even got to watch that process of how they basically made cheese. It was a goat cheese operation, and they got to watch how involved that process was just outside of the regular farming process. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about our mobile learning lab. I'm not going to get into too much depth on this because we're actually going to do a separate training on this in the future with this NTW sessions. So if there's any big questions about that, just kind of be on the lookout for when this is coming up. But we have this mobile learning lab. We kind of conceptualized and initiated it in 2019. We've kicked around the idea in years past, but just really didn't have a good way to do it until that year. And in order to do this, we actually received a grant from the UGA Extension Services, and that allowed us to purchase and wrap the trailer. So the logo on there and everything you see, that was purchased through that grant. And then several of the items that we're actually showing when we go do this are actually inside that trailer, were purchased through those funds as well. And so what this is designed to do is we're able to go to locations themselves. So say we want to go to a specific VR office within the state, we can hook this up and go to that state and be set up to do this presentation or this training within about 30 minutes. And that training, we actually have 4 different curriculums developed for it. So one of them lasts for about an hour, one can be 3 hours, and one can be 4 hours. And so we have all these different stations that we can set up. And these different stations will compare things such as you see the 2 tractor little simulator things. Those seats are set up. One's just no suspension, and then the other one is an air ride seat. And so we're basically comparing, things like an air ride seat versus a non-suspension seat, and why we might recommend an air ride seat to a client. We have gas-powered versus battery-powered outdoor power equipment tools on hand, because sometimes we do recommend a battery-powered outdoor tool or something like that. And then we also have a couple different types of wheelchairs available there, which, so that the counselors or other staff located in that office can actually see these products that we're going to see recommended to clients that we work with. So that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to talk about. I guess if anybody's got any questions regarding that, I suppose we might have a few minutes here. I'm not sure. Yes.
There were, so let's see, there was a question that got answered, but I'll just put it in here. Can an independent contractor become a VR counselor? And Chandra Spear answered, the answer is, it depends. We have different tiers of counselors, and some require a CRC credential and some do not, more like a provisional counselor or job specialist. But we have several job roles that do not require a CRC, including AWT and employment services. Do you have anything else to add to that?
And I think Chandra is actually on our AWT and is with our vocational rehab here in Georgia. So she's probably going to be the best answer to fill that's in this meeting right now.
Okay, and she did share her email if anybody's interested in her chat box. And then Emily Mason, do you remember how big the grant was to cover all these things? And also what type of grant was it?
So the grant was just a grant that the University of Georgia's Ag Extension offered. It was basically an education development grant that they do within, so was only available to Georgia, and people within the university here in Georgia. And the total was $10,000, and we had some matching funds from some other sources. So when I talked about us actually doing these installations and the funding that we charge for that, we can't go out and purchase items for our clients, but those funds that we get from doing those installations, we can actually roll them back into other projects like this. So that's where some of those funds came from, and the rest of it came from that grant through UGA extension.
Okay. If anybody else has more questions, I'm just going to remind you to please check the chat box and complete the evaluation for this session. And Emily says, thank you. I have a quick question since I don't see any more here. So Mason, are you an employee of the University of Georgia?
Yes, I am employed by UGA.
Okay. How's the red tape on, you had mentioned that you get estimates and you do you set up purchase agreements for your clients?
So for several years, we actually really had a lot of red tape. A lot of that was cut out. We had a big problem with vendors. We just didn't have enough vendors in the system to actually really cover what we needed to cover. So we had to really go through and get a lot of vendors established. And that was a very timely process. It probably took about 2 years to really go through that and get a good vendor base set up for our vocational rehabilitation agency. Once we got through that, it really made things a lot more simple. So in every state was different. And then we've talked to different states about it. Some states, they can get a vendor set up in a week. In Georgia, we don't have that luxury.
Right. Okay. Eileen asks, do any of the states use words job retention with VR?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In Michigan, it's called job in jeopardy.
Texas uses job retention. Okay. Chandra asks that Mason, you mentioned that you charge for setup and fabrication. Can you clarify who pays for that? Is that VR or the client who pays for that?
So in certain cases, if it's a VR client and it's approved by authorization for it, then yes, VR actually will pay for those installations that we go out and do.
Mason, when you talk about setting up your vendor base, are you talking about setting that up with the University of Georgia system or with the state vocational rehabilitation system?
That's with the state vocational rehabilitation. Here at UGA, it's pretty easy for us to get a vendor set up, but we, as the rest of the AgrAbility projects, we can't purchase something for our clients. So we have to get VR to do those purchases. And in VR system, their vendor system is a little bit different from ours, and it just takes them longer to get a vendor established for some reason.
Okay, some other folks, Nebraska uses job retention and then also other words that VR likes to see: production, overcoming limitations, preserve longevity, efficiency, essential, necessary. And Colorado uses job retention. And then if anybody has any other questions for the other presentations or the topic on the whole, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, please be sure to visit the link that Tess put in the chat box and enter, be sure to answer the questions about the evaluation. Let's see. So please follow the link in the chat box to answer the evaluation questions about today's session. A recording of this session along with the slides will be archived on the National AgrAbility website, agrability.org, online training 2021 NTW virtual. Whoever is putting that cursor, thank you so much. You can use the same Zoom link that you used today for all of our upcoming Tuesday sessions. You don't need to register more than once. And next week's session is Legacy Innovation Farming Economics Project Life at 1:00 Eastern Time. If you have questions, feel free to contact Tess directly. And her email is on the screen. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So thanks everybody for the great presentations today and sharing all the information. It was really interesting. And be sure to join us next week.